This is the second part of a two-part series, so if you haven't seen the first video, I would suggest going back and seeing it. Also, this gets a little bit spoilerific for the Thundercats 2011 series, so I would actually advise watching that first. It is actually really good. With that out of the way, the video can begin properly. The first reboot of the Thundercats was aired on July 29th, 2011. It was a fresh take with new visuals and a new story. Despite the large changes to the rebooted series, it still stays true to the heart of the original and expands upon it. Like its predecessor, this iteration deals with Lion-O's growth into being the Lord of the Thundercats. However, this time it really delves into what he needs to improve upon within himself. During the first half of the season, Lion-O constantly rushes headfirst into problems and is nearly ruled by his pride. Yet, there are some factors that are different with him. The first and most obvious being that he's a teenager throughout the entire first season, as opposed to miraculously aging to be a muscular adult through a faulty stasis pod. Second being that he witnesses the direct destruction of Thundera, as it's a nation on Third Earth rather than an entire planet. The latter greatly influencing how Lion-O behaves during the early episodes, making him obsessed with getting revenge on Mum-Ra. Couple this with him trying to act like his father Claudius in order to emulate being a leader, and we have a starting point for his character arc. Like the previous video, the Thundercats still contribute to Lion-O's character arc, just in different ways. Starting from the ones that stay the same, Jaga has a reduced role as a mentor towards Lion-O early on. However, by the time the group retrieves the Book of Omens, he becomes something of an embodiment of it. He's also the person who trains Cheetara to be a cleric, explaining most of her abilities and adding a bit more relation between the characters. Speaking of Cheetara, she has some minor changes from the original series. She's still the speedster of the group, however both her speed and psychic abilities have been reduced to keep some modicum of tension in fights. This, however, is made up for with her character. As said before, she was trained to become a cleric by Jaga, and she was also the childhood crush of Tigra. Sometimes flirtatious actions towards Lion-O early on would later produce a bit of a love triangle between them and Tigra, who we'll get to later. Panthro, from a characterization standpoint, is mostly the same, save for a few key differences. Firstly is that he genuinely contests Lion-O's authority when he finally joins the Thundercats, having the young king need to earn his respect in order to order him around. The next big difference is that he was a general in the Thunderan army and a close friend to Groon the Destroyer. Groon being a minor villain in the original run, Panthro was betrayed by Groon and thus swore to defeat him. The now twins, Wily Kit and Wily Cat, have undergone some massive backstory changes as well. Now, they are twins that ran away from their impoverished family, seeking the legendary city of Eldara in hopes that they can bring their family out of poverty. Otherwise, they don't vary too much in personality, aside from Wily Kit, who seems to be a bit more optimistic than her brother, and also more musically inclined. Tigra, by nearly all measures, is completely different. In this iteration, he's Lion-O's adopted brother, who bears massive resentment towards Lion-O for not only taking the crown from him, but also because his adoptive mother died while giving birth to Lion-O. Couple this with the love triangle between Cheetara and the two brothers, and you have half a season of them at each other's necks. Despite his abrasiveness being irritating at times, it's certainly an improvement from being a guy who keeps getting into trouble. Last of the Thundercats, we have Snarf again. This time, he doesn't talk. Thank goodness. Though, he does retain some of the caution that Lion-O lacks. Naturally, most of Snarf's worries turn out to be legitimate, but ultimately ignored by the group, as he can't talk. Though, even in the original, when he could talk, nobody paid attention to him there either. These fleshed out backgrounds of the cast and the relationships created by them make for actual interactions between the characters. one could easily write an episode featuring any two of the group. That said, the kittens should be considered as one in this case. The villains also get in on the backstory rewrites, and are incorporated differently than before. The mutants from the original series are now generals who are members of other animal-based species that work under Mum-Ra. While they come off as being more intimidating, they're about as effective as their previous incarnations. Groon, as stated before, was promoted from being a one-off adversary and took up the first half of the season to defeat. In the previous version, he was a warrior who fought alongside Jaga until going rogue and becoming a mercenary. Now, he was a general alongside Panthro, who wanted to be king. This desire led him to releasing Mum-Ra out of his tomb and bringing about the fall of Thundera. Now, Mum-Ra is no longer just an ancient demon priest that resides on Third Earth. Now he's a sorcerer who sought to conquer the universe with an army of animal-like aliens. That was until Lion-O's ancestor led a revolt and sent his space station plummeting into Third Earth. Mum-Ra is a little more competent than his earlier version, though that may be due to him coming out of his pyramid less frequently. His imposing demeanor is delivered perfectly by Robin Atkin Downes.
Ancient spirits of evil, transform this decayed form into Mum-Ra, the ever-living!
Downes. However, I couldn't help but hear Travis Touchdown in his voice.
What the hell was that?
It's just one of those things when you identify one voice with a certain character, then hear the voice actor in a completely different role, and you can't help but hear that one character speaking like that. While there are a lot of changes in this incarnation of the Thundercats, there are many nods to the roots of the series. Some examples being a callback to the Samaflange outtake of episode 64,
You're standing on my Samaflange.
or the magic word of the Forever Bag being Rankin Bass.
Rankin Bass!
Even changed aspects like Mount Plundar being a reference to Castle Plundar, or the Royal Palace of Thundera resembling the cat's lair. These are bits of glue that tie the series to its roots, yet the changes, both in visuals and writing, give it an identity all of its own. In the end, it's sad that such a well-developed show went the way of Symbionic Titan and was cancelled after given a time change without anyone knowing. Nonetheless, it's inevitable that Roar will be compared to this and how it adapts the original series. As from first impressions, it doesn't have the production quality of 4 Degrees Studio, and it seems unlikely that the writing will give it much of an identity that can separate itself from the original, outside of being a comedic take on the source material.
You took my father's life, but you won't take his sword! Something tells me you watch too many samurai movies, little girl.